Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our discussion series on geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific and Japan's role in the region. Every second Monday, Dr. Stephen Nagy, Senior Associate Professor at the Department of Politics and International Studies at the International Christian University in Tokyo, and host Maya Matsuoka, host a discussion on the latest developments, new challenges, and shifts in the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific region. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions, and opinions, so if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload audio episodes on Japanese politics, business insights, and the Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific region. Good evening to everybody who joined us just now. Once again, we have Dr. Stephen Nagy. You know him already. We have been here doing this series for almost a year now. And it's a pleasure to have him again. Today, the topic is inclusive development in the Indo-Pacific. And as always, we're going to have the briefing from Stephen, and then we'll open the room to comments and questions. You can also comment and write down your questions in the room chat. So please feel free to choose the best option for you. And without any further ado, Stephen, let's start.
All right, Maya, thanks very much. And thanks very much to everybody that has joined for this evening's discussion. We're going to pivot away from, the regular security issues that we usually talk about in terms of the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific. And I want to focus on inclusive development. And the reason why I want to focus on the inclusive development is probably threefold. First, it's what many stakeholders would like within the region, so it gets good buy-in. Two, it's something that Japan in particular has a good track record of promoting outside Japan, and especially in Southeast Asia through developmental projects. And three, I think it's important in terms of the broader understanding of building institutions within the region based on transparent, rules-based governance. And I said that very explicitly, transparent, rules-based governance, as opposed to promoting democracy. Because, again, when we're thinking about buy-in, we're thinking about the things that are going to make a coherent, cohesive, and functional free and open Indo-Pacific. It really is going to have to revolve around transparency and rules and good governance, and less about democracy promotion and value promotion if you want to get maximum buy-in. So let's start with the first point. And the first point is really about this idea that at least Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific vision really does put a lot of emphasis on this idea of inclusive development so that it can get the maximum number of supporters for its initiatives within the region. So inclusive development can be broadly defined as including most parts or all aspects of a community in the developmental process. I think in the Japanese context, they talk about inclusive development primarily through the lens of a binary nature and gender. And I don't want to go into the really all the different definitions of gender, but I think they look at the importance of bringing women into the equation when providing developmental aid in Southeast Asia or South Asia, or even into the African continent. The idea is that you create more equality, you create more better education for all members of society, and that you can create the conditions for them to prosper by creating a bit of capital, helping them develop, and helping them translate a subsistence way of living towards something that can bring some extra cash or extra yen or extra whatever the currency is in a particular country, so that they can start to build the elements that can really build a sustainable path. So what we see in the Japanese context in terms of inclusive development within the region, it can revolve around initiatives in and around the Mekong Delta in terms of infrastructure connectivity projects, in terms of building schools, in terms of education programs. These are all really meant to maximize the number of people that benefit from the developmental policies that Japan is promoting within the free and open Indo-Pacific region. They also understand quite clearly that in societies where there's, in developing societies where there's a lot more gender inequality, that poverty is more persistent, and the problems associated with development, whether it is premature deaths, whether it is short lifespans, whether it's one spouse and the other dying early, and that creates challenges in terms of economic development, that in order to help spur development in these regions, that development has to be as inclusive as possible. I want to emphasize again that the Japanese views inclusive development through this lens, primarily through the binary lens of male and females, but I don't think they're actually purposely excluding any other gender. The second point is thinking about inclusive development through the lens of good governance. And you might be going, oh, what do you mean good governance? Why not democracy and human rights promotion? Well, there's a couple reasons here when we're thinking about Japan in the free and open Indo-Pacific, is that it is quite a promiscuous power in terms of who it engages with. Yeah, I said promiscuous, that's true. And what I mean by that, it's very comfortable working with kingdoms, it's very comfortable working with theocracies, so, it's very comfortable working with authoritarian states in some cases, and it doesn't really necessarily export its own domestic values and domestic the priority it places on human rights and democracy at home. And this makes sense. Japan is resource poor. It needs access to goods from many countries and resources from many countries. And if it's going to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific vision through the lens of democracy and human rights promotion, it's not going to get a lot of stakeholder buy-in from the region. And that's really, really important. And if you think about Southeast Asia, very heterogeneous. We have a soft authoritarian state in terms of Singapore. We have Thailand, which is a semi-military state. Of course, Laos and Cambodia are a kind of democracy. Most would say that they're flawed democracies that are client states of China. Vietnam is a socialist state that really doesn't have any inclination towards democracy. Brunei is a kingdom. The Philippines and Indonesia are both democracies. So when we look at the region, if Japan or other countries are going to take a normative or approach that highlights democracy and human rights in their engagement and in building a free and open Indo-Pacific, they're going to have problems in terms of getting buy-in. And in that case, really, it's really important to stress good governance. And good governance comes in many forms, and this is why we see Japan really highlighting the importance of good governance rather than democracy and human rights. Now, there has been a little shift back and forth, but on these particular areas. So back in 2006, when then Foreign Minister Asotaro visited some countries in Southeast Asia, he talked about an arc of democracy. And then there was some walk back, realizing that a value-based approach to foreign policy in Southeast Asia is not going to get the kind of stakeholder buy-in they need to promote their vision and their hope for a free and open Indo-Pacific vision. Lastly, when we're thinking about this idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific and inclusive development, really they're thinking about how to create institutions within the region that foster an inclusive development process that are firmly based on rules and transparency. And this goes back to my point about good governance really being more related to rules and transparency and less related to democratic promotion. And this may be somewhat difficult to hear, but that is the reality of this particular heterogeneous region, is that if you want to get buy-in for your foreign policy, one, it has to be apolitical to a certain degree, it has to bring value to the region, and has to be able to contribute to building institutions within the region that are sustainable. And what Japan, when it's thinking about its own free and open Indo-Pacific strategy or vision, it's really thinking about how to get the maximum number of countries in the region to think about rules-based order in the same way, to create transparency in how they govern. And by doing that, shared norms can emerge in terms of how to deal with challenges within the region. And this is really, really critical. And it's inclusive in the sense that at the political level, that the approach is allowing for a lot of different political systems to cooperate. At the same time, and this is a challenge, it also creates a bit of an obstacle for the biggest challenge within the region, is that the risen China that is really bound on changing the region's security structure through gray zone tactics, lawfare tactics, and really not obeying international law like we saw after the Permanent Court of Arbitration's decision in 2016. So this inclusive development aspect really is related to and comes from Japan's own developmental experience. It started off being quite a paternal-based society, realized in the 70s that they had to include all people from their society, and that would maximize their development. They see that good education, good health in both sexes really provides the basis for not only people to work in businesses and provide that skill set to building the economy, but also the skill set that helps bring stability to the family and to the community. And this is why I think that Japan has taken an inclusive development approach to how they're thinking about the free and open Indo-Pacific vision. What's interesting is that this inclusive development approach is shared by Canada, it's shared by Australia, it's shared by Scandinavian countries, it's shared by Germany. Frankly, it's shared by South Korea as well. So this is going to be a growing feature of how we think about the free and open Indo-Pacific vision or region that sits alongside some other concerns, in particular security concerns and how the region's economy develops. So these are some opening remarks. Hopefully there's some food for thought in terms of how we're thinking about the free and open Indo-Pacific. And yeah, I look forward to hearing your views.
Thank you, Stephen. I wonder all the things that you just mentioned and, well, let us know at just now. So where is there let's say, can I say a credo where all those things are put down on paper and everybody can see them? Because it is wonderful that we can actually hear them from you. But I'm not sure that the majority of people, even in this region, are aware of all these, let's say, initiatives and also the idea as a whole of the free and open Indo-Pacific.
So I think that if you look at the free and open Indo-Pacific documents and the writing about the free and open Indo-Pacific, or FOIP, in the Japanese diplomatic blue book, or in statements by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and you compare them from 2017 to today, what we see is a real shift away from this idea of strategy, and we see a shift away from a primarily maritime security focus to one that focuses on development, focuses on transparent development, it focuses on building a shared set of rules within the region. So that is a really good place to start. And you can also look at the Ministry of Defense's documents, you can look at the other ministries' documents that include discussions about the free and open Indo-Pacific, and they're all placing this focus on transparent, rules-based order, and in order to achieve that they need to contribute to the infrastructure connectivity within the region, which helps development. They need to maximize the economic productivity of all members of the community. They need to create trade agreements that have a strong attachment to rules. So the CPTPP is a good example. The inclusion of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, although it doesn't speak specifically to gender issues and inclusive development, it is talking about development and development that deals with challenges within the region. And it tries to apply what we call intersectional analysis to how it's thinking about developmental challenges, which really means that it's considering the different stakeholders within the region, not just the male aspect of society. So yeah, that's a good place to start. The Diplomatic Blue Book that you can download easily. Ministry of Foreign Affairs home site. If you look at initiatives under the Quad or under the Free and Open Indo-Pacific, you will see specific mention to development. And this is something that we're going to continue to see as the Free and Open Indo-Pacific vision continues to evolve, that it's going to include a lot of different ways to bring the region together to enhance development and to ensure that the development process is as wide and as stable and sustainable as possible.
Thank you very much for giving all the sources. So this is certainly something very useful. And today we've got Lynn once again. Lynn, hello. Thank you for coming up.
Yes, hello, Maya. Good evening. So,
hi, Lynn. Good
Professor
evening
Stephen.
from Tokyo.
Good evening. So you know that I have a specific questions about Canada's involvement in the Indo-Pacific region because it's quite interesting that just several days before the event that you shared with me, that you moderated at the Canadian embassies in Tokyo last week. So you know that before that, I watched Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly on TV from my home country, and she delivers a speech at the fifth anniversary of Vietnam-Canada Comprehensive Partnership, which was held at the Vietnamese embassy in Canada. So she stated very clearly that Vietnam is a critical country in Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy, and at that time I was quite surprised because as far as I knew before that Canada has yet been able to create an Indo-Pacific strategy. However, in one of your essays, you also pointed out one of the reasons for Canada's absence in the list of Indo-Pacific actors is politicians have not been able to communicate what they mean for the average Canadians. However, you know that during her visit to Indonesia in April this year, Minister Joly also explained very clearly that developing an Indo-Pacific strategy is at the top of the Canadian government's agenda. And she also explained the inclusive element in Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy, which means engaging with different people within different countries and also including a relationship with China and being able to engage diplomatically with China. So I guess that my question for you is, in the position of a scholar, did you change your view about the political issue, about how the Canada's government is working towards an Indo-Pacific strategy after you met and talked with the foreign minister? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lynn. I think that the Canadian government will. And I can't speak authoritatively. I actually can speak quite clearly on this. They're likely to release their own Indo-Pacific strategy in the coming weeks, and that Indo-Pacific strategy will not differentiate between a China strategy and Indo-Pacific strategy. Rather, they can't be de-linked. They have to be the same. And the view is, I think, in Ottawa that the China is part of the Indo-Pacific region, and as a result, they have to be part of the planning. Now, when it does come out, I think that, in my understanding, that it will speak to Canada's priorities within the region, and it most likely will have a strong feminist foreign policy approach, which really looks at any kind of foreign policy engagement so that it benefits all genders as equally as possible. So in this case, it's going to inclusive development side in that it aims to use its comparative advantages in terms of development and focus on inclusive development to bring that to the region. And it's also going to probably articulate the importance of working with like-minded countries to achieve those objectives. And in this case, I think that Canada is thinking about various formulas, of course, working with the United States, Australia, probably working with Japan, but also other formulas such as Japan, Korea, Canada cooperation to achieve these objectives. But if you follow domestic politics in the Canadian context, inclusive development is really, really critical to how they think about the region. And this is why we're going to see a foreign policy and an Indo-Pacific policy that is going to have inclusive development at its core. And meeting the foreign minister in person and speaking to her only strengthen my view that that's the approach.
Yes, thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Lynn. Good to hear from you.
Thank you, Lynn. Well, anybody else in the audience, if you're open or if you are in a situation where you can talk, join us up here on stage so that we can talk with you. And Stephen, while I was listening to you, I also was, let's say, building my hopes for peaceful development of the region, because at the moment, all the news actually coming from all over the world doesn't really give much hope in this regard. And I don't know what your comment on this is, but yeah, definitely. And I think that it's not only me, but a lot of people actually hope that this vision of the Indo-Pacific, free and open Indo-Pacific, will also contribute to keeping the region at peace.
Well, it has to, and that's what it has to work towards. And the countries within this region in particular, whether it's Japan, South Korea, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, or any of Southeast Asian countries, even Australia, they have no choice but to coexist with China and work with the challenges within, work with those partners. But how they do that and how they contribute to building the region will depend on each country's perspective. And I know that Canada, Japan, Australia, the United States does think that inclusive development is a way to bring more representative governance within the region. That they think that this is a good tool to build prosperity in the region and build a common shared set of rules of how to negotiate international relations within the region. And I do think that there's a strong and arguably correct, I think that the empirical evidence is really strong, that the more inclusive development is, the more views are incorporated in terms of how the region develops. And if we incorporate more views, we're likely to have more buy-in and more to institution building within the region. But if, let's say, Japan, and I'm going to use an example of Japan, if Japan just puts a set of rules on the table that suits its society, not reflecting on the broader region's societal needs, it's not going to get any buy-in, and as a result, it's not going to move forward. And I think that this is why countries within this region, despite all the bad news that you mentioned, are still pursuing engagement, are still trying to find ways to work with the more destabilizing countries within the region through trade agreements, through the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, through, again, joint development and inclusive development projects that they believe will bring real sustainable growth to the region.
Well, that's very encouraging too, because I believe that, I come from a European country that joined the European Union in 2007. And in the beginning, when the European Union was created, I think that the idea was the same, to actually create a space where, regardless of, let's say, size, and I mean the size of the country, the population, the level of economy, actually all the countries could benefit from being there. But it seems that the ideas gradually change with time, and the bigger countries, they pull everybody into their direction, more or less. Hopefully this is not going to happen here in the Indo-Pacific too.
Well, there is a real security issue within the region, but you don't pursue foreign policy only through the lens of a security lens. You have to pursue it through a comprehensive way of engaging. And we've talked about infrastructure connectivity in the past. We've talked about economic agreements in the past. We've talked about Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, but we haven't talked about inclusive development. But I think it is an element of how we're moving forward, and it's not something that's revolutionary. It's not something that we can see it overnight. It's something that takes time, and countries like Japan are well placed to help with inclusive development needs within the region, and they're actually much better at it out of the country than in the country, which is a whole another discussion. But I do think it's really important for us to be thinking about this broader region. Not only through the lens of security, but also think about it through the lens of how inclusive development can contribute to institution building and building shared ways of behaving within the region that inculcate stability to the broader region.
Yes, and there is a comment from Richard Woughton in the room chat that is exactly to the point you made just now. So his comment reads, the security elements of the Indo-Pacific strategy are something to be expected, but the social elements are also very interesting. For example, women's empowerment. How do these elements complement UN efforts, for example? Are there any synergies?
So thanks, Richard. It's good to hear from you. It was good to see you the other week. So first, I think it's important to point out that there's not one Indo-Pacific strategy. The U.S. has its Indo-Pacific strategy. Japan has a vision. ASEAN has their own vision of the free and open Indo-Pacific. The French have theirs, Germans and other countries. They're all slightly different. But when you peer down into them, in particular the middle power countries like Germany or the Netherlands or the UK or Australia, they really speak to a broader, more comprehensive view about how to be thinking about the region in terms of inclusive development and mobilizing all members of society to foster development. And I think it's really, really important. Now, these do complement UN efforts, but they're more targeted, and they may add more value than some of the UN efforts. Because of the nature of development in this region, because of this region is, has relatively competent governance structures, although I'm not going to say that they're perfect. And I think that they, in many ways, they'll complement the UN's activities within this region. But we also should understand that there's leading countries like Japan and South Korea that are very active in promoting good governance within the region and these kinds of initiatives to the region. So it's not just the United States doing this, but the more advanced and richest countries within the region are still actively using these form of diplomacy to try and build stability into the region.
So that is also a very encouraging thing to know. And another thing that also struck me when you were talking is that Japan is, as a country, as a culture, it is considered, or it is often viewed as a country that is not very inclusive, but all these policies and the whole idea of an open and inclusive development in the Indo-Pacific actually goes against this image of the country. And I wonder, so you also told us in the beginning of this series that the idea was firstly introduced by former Prime Minister Abe. And so I see this as a kind of a phenomenon because of the general image of Japan, and then the whole idea that contradicts its image.
Well, I think that we should be careful in how we compare the domestic situation about inclusivity and diversity issues and how they're promoted abroad, and understanding how they're critical to development. Japan's initial development process, happened more than 150 years ago during the Meiji Restoration. Modernization happened. It was quite a transformative social experience. It eventually evolved into imperialism, and during that imperial period, the Japanese sent their men to fight, and women went into the factories to build things. So they always had the ingredients for inclusive development at home. And in the post-World War II period, they returned to a more traditional understanding of the roles of men and women. But beginning in the 70s, they also recognized that Japan is to be modern and to be developed and to be an effective economy, that you need to include women in the economy as well. Now, those lessons, I think, scholars understand how it works. People that do the policy work understand the importance of inclusivity at home. But it seems that they haven't been able to achieve it at home. But when they're providing aid abroad, there's pretty clear recognition of the importance of promoting gender equality abroad in Japanese aid. And I think that comes out in how we think about and how Japan is promoting its free and open Indo-Pacific vision. That open and free means that everybody and all people in your society can be free and do what they want. So I think that we can look at this at a couple different levels, Maya. And I think that it may seem like a paradox initially, but Japan is Japan, and South Korea is South Korea, and other countries have different experiences that Japan can help with by promoting more gender equality in their developmental policies.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for that. And Han, good morning. No, this is good evening to you. Sorry.
Yeah. Hi, Maya. Hi, Stephen. I have a question for Stephen. So recently, I noticed that a lot of regional major power like United States, UK, and other European countries, they engage a lot with Vietnam with development initiative, the type of initiative that promoting gender equality, poverty eradication, inclusive development, and good governance. And at the same time, I think that we also need to think about what China is doing in terms of development in the region. From what I see, I think that the Chinese tend to be involved with development projects that can generate money quickly and can show results quickly, like infrastructure projects, or let's say building a special economic zone. So I have a question: like, do you think that there is a possibility that major powers and great powers are competing with each other, and also compete with United Nations development projects when it comes to those inclusive development projects. But at the same time, they have not really been given enough attention to infrastructure, energy projects. Things that I believe that leaders from developing nations tend to prefer, because they generate result very quickly, and they can use it to show to the population that they are doing something for economic growth.
So I thanks Han, and it's great to hear the sounds from Hanoi. That makes me Hanoi sick. I'd like to visit again. So I do think that countries are now emphasizing more inclusive development in how they're engaging within the region, and the reason why I think that the developmental studies that you look at show that when development projects are as inclusive as possible, they're more sustainable and they have a better positive effect on the local community. And it's the formula is that you move the woman away from a subsistence living to one that builds a little bit of capital. And when they can get some capital, they can translate that into consumption, or they can translate into better education for their kids or better health outcomes. So it's very, the data is there. Now, of course, infrastructure connectivity has immediate impact, but it hires mostly men. And in that sense, it's not an inclusive form of development. So it's not, when we're thinking about inclusive development, it's not one or the other. It's how can we pursue both paths so that they complement each other. And in this sense, depending on the project designer, they will ensure that they're hiring local women in the projects, that what is culturally acceptable, and to mobilize women within the community, they will do their best. And they try to get female stakeholders on board with the development processes. So again, that this is more of a sustainable process in terms of how development moves forward. And you're correct that the reality is that these kinds of inclusive development projects take longer. It takes time to change the local culture in a way that keeps all the good parts, but also gives opportunity for the people in that society to do something different and bring value to their family and to their community. And that seems to be how inclusive development approaches have been occurring within this region. Now, the Chinese are actually pretty good with this as well. And if you look at some of their Belt Road Initiative projects, really they're trying to empower women aspects of their society as well, because they understand from their own experience that if you want to development, that you have to embody the expression that women hold up half the sky. At least that's what Mao said during the revolution, and I think that is really true. And if you want to have the most benefit, you have to mobilize all parts of society, and the inclusive development projects should do their best to do that.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Han.
Well, we continue to have to receive comments in the chat. So Hiroaki, thank you for your comments. And so I guess that you see some that is contradiction in actually discussing regional integration, while we see that the world actually is going to be probably less global and more regional. Stephen, do you have any comments on this?
So thanks, Hiroaki. So I'm reading your question as well. So I think that we have to differentiate between an inclusive region that includes all the countries, and inclusive development. And here we're talking about at the social level, ensuring that all members of a society are mobilized so that they can benefit from the development projects within the region. And the view is that broader inclusive development creates more sustainable and stable development that brings more value to the receiving society. So can this foster more integration in the region? Likely. I think that if you empower communities and you create more opportunity for all members of society to benefit, then you're likely going to have more opportunities to integrate with other markets and other communities in the region.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. And we continue with, we have quite a few. And then, Fong Tran, I hope I don't mispronounce your name. Well, it looks, your comment is about continued political instabilities in the European Union and APAC regions, and also increasing direct foreign investment in the USA. And you have shared an article with us. So everybody who is interested in reading it, you can go there. You can go to the room chat, click on the link, and read the article. Also, Hiroaki, we continue. Okay.
So Hiroaki talked about, or he raised this question about President Xi Jinping's address yesterday on inclusive development, and that inclusive development cannot be achieved by China only. I think this is true. I think that we need to find ways to work with China on development issues. This is not an easy task at this particular stage because of the geopolitical tensions, but it doesn't mean that we can't find ways for development projects and to complement or have a standard about ensuring that the development process is inclusive. On the Chinese side, the challenge is that their 5 principles of peaceful coexistence do focus on non-interference, and the non-interference side of that means that they're not really out there promoting the values that they may have at home. And this is a good thing, and it's a bad thing. I think that we need to definitely think about the inclusion of all members of society when we're thinking about development. So there are opportunities to work with China, but it will require some creative diplomacy. And I think that the former and late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, when he didn't engage with China from a zero-sum point of view. If you remember back just before the pandemic started, he visited Beijing and he signed 55 inclusive infrastructure connectivity projects with China. So the Japanese and China can work together. They can find ways to contribute to development within the region, and that development in this region will eventually have to include China in some capacity, so the institution building is as inclusive as possible.
Right, yes. And we continue with another question from Richard. Does China view all these Indo-Pacific visions as being anti-China?
Absolutely. They view the Indo-Pacific strategies that are coming out in the region as targeting China, as being trying to contain China. I think that this is in part rhetoric, Richard. In part, it's a real belief. Their post-revolution period, they have always had mistrust about being overthrown or having a counter-revolutionary movement in China. This is why they are concerned about these Indo-Pacific strategies.
Okay, so yes, Richard, I hope that this answers your question. Of course, you're welcome to join us up on stage, or also, yes, continue, however. So, and Han, okay, you shared, there are 2 articles on Wall Street Journal and Nikkei Asia talking about China might have to change its approach to development funding due to the debt crisis in emerging markets like Sri Lanka. Yes, probably. So, Han, do you have the links to these articles? If you have them, just please share them with us, or maybe
Yeah.
help us. Yes.
Yeah. I went. Yes, I went look at them and share. So basically, they probably might need to plan more carefully in the future and more in line with international standards when it comes to development funding. So basically, they might look at the rules set by G7 nations when it comes to lending for developing countries in order to reduce the tide of bad debt they have collected in Sri Lanka and to a certain extent Pakistan.
So Han, I agree with this, but I think what we're seeing is that all funding programs, whether it's from China or other countries, are going through a process of recalibration, in part related to geopolitics, in part related to the COVID-19 pandemic, in part related to the current downward cycle in the global economy, which is going to have severe pressure on the ability of countries like Japan and others to provide developmental assistance to the levels that they used to. And, if you think about Japan, its yen just devaluated to, I think, 148 yen per dollar. This means they can do a lot less with the same amount of yen. And this is going to be a challenge moving forward. And, it's not just the Japanese yen that's devaluated, it's other currencies as well. So there's going to be a need for a reset or a recheck of how the loan system works, not only from China, but many countries as the economies continue to be challenged by inflation, the war in Ukraine, downward trends in the global economy, supply chain disruptions in China, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, thank you for that. Han, thank you for sharing the links. So the links to those two articles are already in the room chat. If you have time and want to read them, please do go there and have a read. And we've got Mikio. Hello to you, Mikio. Thank you for coming up.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. Um, I know it's not directly inclusive development, but because there's another country that talks about wanting to be very inclusive when it comes to Taiwan, and it just happened yesterday. Maybe you could comment on your read of the speech by President Xi. Would you think that is that a somewhat softer version of what one might have expected, or no change? Or can you give us your sense? I know it's early, but I would be interested in your views, Stephen.
So I think that Xi Jinping has been consistent in his statements vis-a-vis Taiwan, in that the priority and the preference is some kind of peaceful reunification with Taiwan as soon as possible. In particular, they don't want to pass on this reunification to future generations. They want to settle it within a generation. And I think the deadline that the Chinese today are thinking about is before the so-called 2049 centenary of the People's Republic of China. The reason why I say it's consistent is because he stressed this idea of a peaceful reunification, but also that they didn't disavow using force, and this is consistent with the previous governments. What might be different when we look at the previous Congress reports is that this statement wasn't included. So I think that the fact that it's included is we see that China is trying to send the strongest of messages in the wake of being other countries sending the strongest of messages to China that the Taiwan issue needs to be settled by peacefully. So that is how I read it. I think it's consistent. If China was going to take over Taiwan, it would have to amass a lot of resources. This would be easy to check through satellites and other forms of maritime domain awareness. And of course, the Taiwanese themselves would be very much putting a red flag, saying that all the warnings are there that China is getting ready to take over Taiwan, but it's not there. Arguably, I think the cost of reclaiming Taiwan is much, 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 much more expensive than the party would like to pay at this particular time, and their deep preference is for some kind of peaceful reunification. It doesn't fit within inclusive development, Mikio, but I understand the importance of the question.
Yukio, thank you for coming up. And yes, we continue with Janusz. She is the first one who is saying that the unification must happen by 2027.
Thanks,
So
Janos.
this is great.
I haven't seen this comment before. I think that there has been some reports by by the United States and admirals in the United States saying that 2027 is significant in some way. But I think most China watchers looking at this particular case thinks that while they would like to reunify with Taiwan as soon as possible, that the timelines of acquiring the appropriate number of resources, the technology, and the ability to push back against most like a very consolidated and cohesive group of countries that would push back against some kind of forced reunification is in the early 30s. But I have never seen a document that says by 2027.
Yeah, 2027 is just, it looks like very soon from now, So, well, let's see what happens because, the early 30s, there is enough time for other development, definitely. Not here, only here in the region, but also globally. Okay, this is not the USA, but China. Okay, Janos, thank you very much for that. Did anybody ask the Taiwanese what they want?
Well, I think the voices of the Taiwanese have been quite clear. It's that they are not interested in reunification. They're interested in the status quo as long as possible. I think that is very clear in survey after survey. But I'm presenting what I understand of these issues, and I do not think the Taiwanese are interested in reunification anytime soon. I do agree with you. The Chinese would like this as soon as possible, but I've never seen a hard date. Although I do know that Xi Jinping has mentioned that he would like this not to be passed on to future generations, which the assumption is before 2049. Anyways, I'd like to pivot back to this idea of inclusive development and the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific, and why I think many countries are talking about inclusive development as part of their Indo-Pacific visions or strategies.
Great. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. It looks like we have finished the questions for tonight, so we can safely say that, introduce the next session, actually. So the next session is going to be on October the 31st. It will be once again at 8 p.m. Japan time, and then the topic will be the Biden administration post-midterms and the Indo-Pacific. So it is going to be another topic with a lot of new developments about it. Please join us at that time if your schedule allows, and then we can continue the conversation. Stephen, before we close the room, do you have a few words in conclusion?
Sure. I think it's really important for us to be thinking about this idea of Indo-Pacific strategies as not all being the same strategy or vision. Germany has their perspective of engaging in the region. Australians have their perspective. The US has their perspective. Japan has their perspective. And ASEAN has their perspective. The countries in China's backyard cannot have a zero-sum approach to their engagement with China, although they do have concerns, and their Indo-Pacific strategies are informed by their need to engage, but also their concerns. Second, and I think importantly, is that it can't just be about security. It has to be about trade. It has to be about building shared norms within the region. And of course, this idea of inclusive development that brings in and creates the maximum amount of prosperity for the maximum number of people in the region. And this will continue to be really, really important. And I assume in the post-COVID era and I don't know when we'll ever get out of the post-Russian invasion of Ukraine, that this will continue to be a really big and important theme, as many countries from the global south have been heavily hurt by both the pandemic, but also Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the disruption of many supply chains, including food supply chains. So a couple of important things to be thinking about when you're thinking about this idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific. Inclusive development is going to be one of those important pillars.
Well, this is a great way to finish the room today. So thank you very much again, everybody. And yes, We hope to see you again on October 31st. It's Monday at 8 o'clock p.m. Japan times. Have a good night and see you then. Bye. This was Japan Expert Insights on geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific and Japan's role in the region. Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air in 2 weeks on Monday at 8:30 p.m. Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload audio episodes on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Again, we are looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and make every day count. See you.